I think there are a lot of confusing messages about health and food out there that don't really help the cause. Look at the most recent debate, fat versus sugar, two things that we know scientifically are of concern. And I think a big problem is that in the field of nutrition science, we look at individual nutrients like fat, carbohydrate, protein, etc. to figure out the metabolic consequences of food. And so when we're putting out public guidance about what we should be eating, we talk in terms of nutrients instead of converting those nutrients into foods like fish, fruit, cookies, and so on. But I think talking about foods rather than nutrients is an important step we need to take. At the same time, we don't have to say to people you can eat this or you can't eat that, but we should help give people a wider view of the relative proportions of various food groups and dietary patterns on the whole.
The enormous rise of the middle class in certain developing countries is one of the greatest economic successes of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. This is excellent for the economies of those countries because the middle classes usually earn more than they need to live on, and thus they can save money. It's important that economists understand how these processes work, and thus they need to understand the savings habits of the new middle class. Our research, therefore, aimed to investigate patterns of savings and reasons for savings decisions. The country we chose to focus on was India. We found that, not surprisingly, it was the richer people, especially business owners, who tended to save more. As for the reasons for saving, the number one reason was to provide an income after retirement. Having an income after becoming too old to work was important for savers who wanted to be able to enjoy their older years. And the second most important reason was for family purposes, such as the education and weddings of their children.
Since before the first moon landings of 1969, there has been interest in space travel to the moon. Lunar programs are expensive and difficult, but there are several reasons why the moon might be a good place to launch further space exploration. Firstly, a moon launch base would eliminate the most difficult aspect of space travel, namely, getting a rocket through the Earth's gravity. The journey time between, say, going to Mars from Earth rather than from the moon is not significant. However, the cost difference would be immense, as it would take 20 times less fuel to launch a spacecraft from the moon than from the Earth, due to there being less gravity on the moon. There would not need to be a drain on the Earth's resources, as the moon is rich in all the necessary minerals, such as aluminium and silicon, which would mean that the entire infrastructure needed to enable spacecraft launch from the moon could be done robotically using the materials already present.
The other thing that this tablet tells us a little about, as I've mentioned, is the fact that writing is hugely important in Roman London, and it's something which really marks it out within the context of Roman Britain. Here we have in excess of 500 examples of wooden writing tablets surviving, many other inscriptions. An awful lot of them are to do with this whole kind of idea of commerce, of business transactions. An awful lot of it, the written texts, are to do with the Roman army. And that's precisely because writing in a society where literacy rates would have been significantly lower than they were today was really a tool of power. And things like these rather fancy metal inkwells, which have been found in a number of sites in London, I think really reflect that. And in fact, within Britain, they're quite heavily concentrated here.
The salt trade has existed for thousands of years and arguably has played an even greater role in shaping the world's economic and social history than products like silk, cotton or spices. Salt mining is still hugely important today, and there are three basic ways that salt can be extracted from oceans or underground sources. So, starting with probably the earliest method, which is solar evaporation. This method is used to extract salt from seawater. Basically, seawater is collected in shallow pools. The seawater dries out when it's exposed to sun and wind. When this happens, a layer of salt is left behind which can be cleaned and harvested. A newer technique is solution mining. This method uses a water solution to extract salt from underground rock sources. Water is injected into the rock and absorbs the salt. The salty liquid is then pumped back to the surface, where the salt can be extracted at a processing plant. Finally, deep shaft mining is similar to other types of mineral mining. Here, pieces of rock containing the salt are drilled away from the mine shaft. These pieces are then crushed into smaller chunks and transported to the top for processing. Today, we're looking at the study options available to students after completing school. And the two main choices are higher education and further education. Higher education basically means studying for a university degree. This involves detailed study and is usually theoretical in nature. That said, the skills students learn can be used in many different careers, so companies are eager to hire graduates. However, remember that degree courses are long and costly. Conversely, further education focuses more on practical skills rather than theoretical knowledge. These courses prepare students for a specific job, such as training to be a chef, and offer great practical work experience opportunities. However, as the skills learnt on further education courses tend to be more specialised, they cannot be transferred to other types of career very easily. As you can see, it's important to compare the pros and cons of higher and further education carefully before making a decision.
Today, I'm going to talk about the art of paper marbling, which, as the name suggests, is about adding beautiful, colourful designs onto paper. It involves putting a piece of paper onto a tray of special water and paint in order to create unique and detailed designs. As for the history of this art, the origins are not entirely known, although it is believed to have begun in China or Japan. Paper marbling subsequently became very popular in Turkey. Indeed, Turkish paper marbling developed its own particular styles, characterized by brighter colors. This type of marbling gained a lot of popularity in Europe in the 17th century and was used extensively in the publishing industry for book covers, especially in England. It was an attractive and effective way of hiding any minor damage to a book. Nowadays, the art of paper marbling is in decline for various reasons. However, there are attempts to encourage a new generation to discover paper marbling, and social media is a great way to promote it to a new audience. Paper marbling classes are also starting to appear, so perhaps there is hope for this art.
Let's begin with a definition. Typography is the art and technique of arranging letters and text on a page so that readers can read it easily and it looks attractive so people want to read it. So why does typography matter? Well, we live in a visual world. We're used to figuring out the aim of a document by looking at its style and appearance, even before we start reading it. Whenever we see a document, we form an immediate judgment. We're experts at doing this. Recent research into readers' responses to different types of print designs has revealed some common assumptions readers make when they first see a document. Subjects were presented with carefully designed pages, but couldn't read any of the text because it contained words which don't actually exist. Despite this, they could still make important decisions based on how the information was presented. They quickly decided how accurate the content was and the possible use of the document. They also looked at the boxes of texts and images to decide how serious the text might be. If the text boxes were in lots of different colours or shapes and sizes, then these were related to negative qualities. These results confirm that readers respond to how something is designed as soon as they see it.
The world's first artists were ancient people who lived 40,000 years ago or more and did cave paintings. But what did they paint, and who exactly were these early artists? Well, they didn't paint human beings. Instead, they painted animals on the walls of their caves. That's because animals were very important to them. After all, the animals provided them with food and clothing. As well as animals, they put their hands against the cave walls and painted around them. And it's these handprints which may help us to answer the second question. Who did the paintings? For a long time, it was believed that it was mostly men. However, research done on paintings in a cave in France has shown that the artists were often women and not just men. We know this because the size of women's hands is smaller than men's hands. In fact, the majority of the handprints in the French cave were smaller ones. This has made us think again about who the world's first artists really were.
How do consumers process the vast amount of information and multitude of possibilities presented to them? Well, from the perspective of behavioral economics, a concept called salience plays a key role in this. So, salience is when consumers' attention is attracted to certain characteristics. That's because to work efficiently, our brains try to take shortcuts by prioritizing some characteristics. In other words, items with high levels of salience stand out, meaning we'll be more likely to choose them. The salience of a product can be increased in a number of ways. Firstly, items can become more salient by appealing to one of our physical senses. For example, the inviting smell of freshly baked bread in a grocery store. Alternatively, products can also have higher salience when they're presented in a way that is somehow cognitively unusual. Advertisements, which include shocking humor, usually attract consumers' attention. And of course, sometimes a particular characteristic becomes more salient simply because our individual needs have evolved. A person who has recently become a parent may well start considering whether the items that they used to purchase without any hesitation are in fact child-friendly.
In today's session, we're going to look at an important concept in psychology, which is called the bystander effect. When there's an emergency situation in public, you'd hope that a person nearby would intervene and help, but actually, most people have a tendency to, well, do nothing. That's the bystander effect, essentially. And here's the interesting thing. The more people there are in an emergency situation, the less likely it is that anyone will actually intervene. There's an inverse relationship between the number of bystanders and the amount of help offered. So why is that? Well, researchers have identified something called diffusion of responsibility. Basically, everyone just assumes that someone else will take charge of the situation instead of them. And obviously, that can lead to potentially serious consequences, so that brings me to ways that this problem can be tackled. Of course, we should be educating people in school and workplaces about basic first aid and what to do in an emergency. That will give people more confidence, but that doesn't address the bystander effect. Basically, we have to minimize the diffusion of responsibility. And the best way of doing this is by getting people to imagine that they are the only person available to intervene. This gives them the responsibility, so they will be more likely to step in.
Today's session is about a feature of TV production called canned laughter, a recording of a studio audience laughing inserted into a program. So the finished product sounds as if the studio audience is laughing along as the action unfolds. There are several reasons for the use of canned laughter, which we can divide into technical reasons and creative ones. In terms of technical aspects, canned laughter compensates for the unpredictability of live studio audiences. For instance, some individuals might laugh too loudly or in what producers consider to be the wrong places, or they might even clap and cheer, all of which can interfere with the scene. And of course, canned laughter is also needed when scenes take place outside a studio. However, canned laughter is also believed to enhance the program itself. Research has shown that the inclusion of canned laughter can actually change people's perceptions of what they're watching. It's been demonstrated that viewers are more likely to laugh or have a favourable impression of a scene when they can hear other people laughing. So, canned laughter is great news for television executives that crave high ratings. Of course, as viewers' tastes in comedy have changed, many shows have moved away from the use of canned laughter. Nevertheless, it remains an effective and familiar aspect of TV comedy.
When a baby is born, its brain is already a quarter of its final size. But when does a baby start to learn? Well, experts believe that a baby is learning even before it is born. When it is born, though, it will start learning very quickly, much more quickly than an adult. At the beginning, the baby listens and watches all the skills being performed that it needs to learn, such as speaking, walking, playing, eating, and singing. Some parents think that their baby isn't learning, but it is. The baby has to watch and listen to something many times before it can do that thing. For parents, an exciting moment is their baby's first smile. This happens at around 6 weeks old. Another important moment is when baby takes its first step. The earliest this can happen is when the baby is about 9 months old.
So now I want to look at two big problems in the world today and something that someone has invented to solve these problems. The first problem is that people don't get enough exercise, which is obviously bad for people's health. The second is that people are using too much electricity. The process of making electricity causes pollution, which is also bad for our health, as well as being bad for the environment. So here we might have a solution: an exercise bike. Perhaps you are thinking, well, that solves problem number 1, the exercise problem, but what about problem 2? Well, this is where the idea for the invention comes from. What if you could solve the pollution and health problems at the same time? So how about an exercise bike that can create electricity? You can then use that electricity for power in your home.
As a new student, there are many things that you can do to get a good start at university. Attending lectures is something that we expect all students to do. If you miss a lecture, though, or didn't quite understand the topic, or simply want to hear it again, you can watch a video recording of the lecture online. However, university life is very busy, and you won't have much time, so it's better to concentrate and take good notes when you do attend a lecture. If you make notes, it helps you to think about the important facts and ideas in the lecture, and writing these things down can help you to remember them. Again, there may be lecture notes available online, but making your own notes is much more valuable.